uncertainty, the Stoic approach to life design. What if I told you that the most successful people in history built their lives on a foundation of expecting the worst to happen? Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire while plague ravaged his territories. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in prison and emerged to lead a nation. Steve Jobs was fired from the company he created and used that failure to build his greatest success. These aren't stories of blind optimism or positive thinking. They're examples of something far more powerful: the ancient art of designing a life that thrives on uncertainty itself. Most people spend their entire lives running from uncertainty, building elaborate plans to avoid discomfort, and then wonder why they feel so fragile when life inevitably throws them curveballs. But what if uncertainty isn't the enemy of a well-designed life? What if it's actually the secret ingredient that makes life worth living? The Stoics discovered something revolutionary 2,000 years ago that modern psychology is only now catching up to. When you stop trying to control the uncontrollable and start building systems that work regardless, you don't just survive uncertainty, you become anti-fragile. You become someone who gets stronger from chaos, not weaker. Today, I'm going to show you exactly how to design a life that doesn't just weather the storm, dances in the rain. 1. The reverse engineering principle. There's a Japanese pottery technique called kintsugi, where artists deliberately break beautiful vases, then rebuild them with gold thread running through the cracks. The broken vase becomes more valuable than the original. But here's what most people don't know about this ancient art form. The masters don't just break random vases and hope for the best. They study exactly crack ever pick up the. Most people approach decisions like they're walking through a minefield, and nothing goes wrong. But the Stoics are evolutionary about uncertainty. People who thrive aren't the ones who avoid failure, become experts. Last major decision. Did you imagining success for failure? People, you spent weeks dreaming about how amazing everything would be. Visualized the perfect outcome, ends based on best-case scenarios, and then felt completely shattered when reality hit you with curveballs you never saw. But what if I told you there's a technique that turns this entire approach upside down? What if instead of hoping your vase you became a master at predicting exactly where it will crack? What if you could walk into any situation with the unshakable confidence that comes from already having survived the worst-case scenario in your mind? This isn't about being negative or building something the Stoics called strategies. Exactly how something can. You gain the power from break it so beautifully that it becomes stronger. The first 10 that will transform how is engineering principle. It uses what I call the broken technique. Here, before you make a life decision, you're going to imagine it's all spectacular. You're going every possible way your career could crumble, your relationship could fall apart, or your project could collapse. Then you're going to build backup systems for each failure point. When you've already mentally survived the worst-case scenario, something incredible happens to your psychology. You stop operating from a place of fear and start operating from a place of fearless confidence. You become the person who can take bigger risks because you know exactly how to handle the consequences. 2. The dichotomy of control audit. Have you ever noticed how the calmest people in crisis situations seem to have some kind of superpower? While everyone else is panicking, they're making clear decisions, effective action. They're not superhuman. They're not naturally brave. They've just learned to see the world through a completely different lens. Most people waste enormous amounts of mental energy worrying about things they can't control. They stress about what their boss thinks, whether it will rain tomorrow, or if the economy will crash. Meanwhile, they ignore the things that they can actually influence. They don't exercise because they're worried about global warming. They don't improve their skills because they're anxious about automation. They don't build better relationships because they're stressed about politics. This backwards approach to life creates a constant state of anxiety and helplessness. You're always reacting to external circumstances instead of creating the life you want. But the Stoics discovered a simple system that flips this entire dynamic. Instead of trying to control everything, you learn to identify what you can control and pour all your energy into those areas. Imagine if you could eliminate 90% of your daily anxiety with one simple technique. Imagine if you could double your effectiveness by focusing only on the things that actually matter. Imagine if you could develop the same unshakable calm that the most successful possess naturally. The second technique out of 10 is called the dichotomy of control audit, and it uses what I call the traffic light system. You're going to categorize every source of stress into 3 colors. Green means you have total control over it. Yellow means you have partial influence. Red means you have zero control. Once you've sorted to these 3 categories, you follow one simple use of your energy on 20% on yellow and exactly 0% on red items. This isn't just about time management. This is mentally rewiring how your brain processes stress and uncertainty. When you stop wasting energy on things you can't control, something amazing happens. You suddenly have massive amounts of mental and emotional in the things you can actually change. You become incredibly effective because you're no longer across 100 different worries. You're focused like a laser on the few things that actually matter. The people who seemed in crisis situation dealing with you, they've just learned all their energy into their circle of instead of their circle of concern. The negative visuatory psychological happens to lottery reveals something profound about human nature. Within $2 million, most lottery winners report being no happier than they were before, actually more miserable. They thought money would solve all their problems, but instead, they discovered that happiness isn't about having, it's about appreciating what. But here's the part that will blow your mind. There's a group of people who experience massive increases in happiness and life satisfaction without winning the lottery or changing anything of circumstances. They've discovered a technique that instantly makes them feel incredible for their current life. Ordinary it seems. Most people take their blessings for granted until they lose them. They don't appreciate their health until they get sick. They don't value their relationships when someone leaves. They don't realize they have it. This constant one never being said you have. Stoics realize that it makes you appreciate them. Could gain that appreciation actually losing anything. To gain the benefits without the action of real. The third technique is called the Negation Laboratory, and it uses the gratitude time machine. Once a week and 10 minutes, as if you've lost everything you currently, your health, relationships, your job, all gone. It isn't about being morbid or depressed, is psychological. When you mentally experience, two powerful things happen. Develop incredible gratitude right now. Second, attachment to outcomes, which makes you more resilient. Actually do go. Think about simply worried about losing. Now imagine you've miss most. Turn to your where you still have it. Urge of relief and appreciation you just felt. That's what this every single time. When you regularly practice losing you can truly appreciate what while being for whatever comes next. Inventory method. There's a story of an artist who kept complaining about how difficult training, the punching bag, the weather, the other competitive. He fails to complain about. Finally, Mr. said something that everything. Training, despite your training is pointing you to develop. Most people see evidence that they're when they immediately for easier routes. They change careers, ships when they quit problems. They're the very experience them stronger. Group of people completely differently. Don't see resistance as a sign to quit. They see it as a compass pointing them toward their true path. They understand that your struggles aren't random. Need to grow. Think about the most successful. Achieve their success all obstacles? Or they are by facing on and you stepping stone. Every who has ever achieved thing in common. See obstacles, but as the foot of 10 is called inventory, and it uses what I call the resistance mapping technique. Keep a running list of you encounter. Ask question for each one. How is this obstacle pointing me toward my truth? When you start asking this question consistently, discover something incredible. Obstacles aren't random roadblocks designed for the exact need to develop. The difficulty is the financial string the relationship conflict, communication. Avoid resist. They think it means but successful resistance like a compass, they know it's pointing. Where growth happens, where you are meant to be. When every obstacle instead of failure, you become unstoppable. You stop seeing problems as reasons to quit and start to choose about where to focus your energy next. 5. Identity. Watched a great transform into voice. They're in. But here's fascinating. The day they take them and go home as they don't confuse their identity. They understand the difference between the role they're playing and who they really are. Most people make a critical. They think they are their circumstances. When they think they are a failure. When they succeed, they think they are amazing. When they make a mistake, they think they are stupid. They've confused the character they're playing with their essential self. This creates enormous psychological suffering. Every setback becomes a personal attack on their identity. Every success becomes something they need to defend. They become rigid and fragile because they're trying to protect an image instead of adapting to reality. But there's a group of people who are the greatest actors. They understand that they're in the movie of their life, but they're not the character. They can fully while maintaining psychological distance from the. The fifth technique out of 10, the identity fluidity practice, is what I call the actor's paradox. You're going to set that you're playing a character life, not that you are the character. Incredible psychological freedom. You get fired, the character gets fired, your essential self. When the character succeeds, dependent on that success. When you make a mistake, the character, but you're not FUD. This isn't about being detached or not caring. Great actors care deeply about their performance. They just don't confuse their performance with their. They can take risks because they know that a bad performance doesn't make them a bad person. When you understand that you're playing a character, be adaptable. You can accept approaches because you're not defending your ego. You can take feedback because your character isn't your essence. Thrive in uncertain times with the strongest identities, the ones with the most fluid. They can reinvent many times as necessary because all identities are temporary cost. The temporary everything. There's a Buddhist story about a man who's spinning the perfect sandcastle, day and night, hours and detailed. It was absolute. But as the tide came, instead of enjoying his masterpiece, and angry, he tried to beat the water out, desperately to preserve. He made the beauty of the moment, focused on making it. Most people approach man. They try to make They want job that lasts for. They want relationship change. They want health that never declines. They want success that never wavers. Desperate grasping for permeates constant anxiety prevents them from fully experiencing what they have. There's a different way. Instead of trying permanent, you can embrace the temporary nature of everything. This isn't about being negative or pessimistic. This is about being present. When you truly understand that everything is temporary, you stop taking things for granted and start showing up fully while they're here. The sixth technique out of 10 is called the temporary everything philosophy, and it uses what I call the rental mindset. You're going to treat everything in your life as borrowed. Your job, your relationships, your health, even your thoughts. None of it belongs to you permanently. This might sound scary at first, but it's actually incredibly liberating. When you know something is temporary, you stop wasting energy trying to control it and start investing energy in it. Because you know this lasts forever. Think about how you act when you're staying in a beautiful hotel. You don't try to own the hotel. You don't stress about the maintenance. You just enjoy the experience while you're there. That's how you can approach everything in your life. When you adopt the rental mindset, you develop what the Stoics called preferred indifference. You prefer good things to happen, but you're not attached to them. You can enjoy success without being defined by it. You can handle failure without being destroyed by it. The people who seem most at peace aren't the ones who have the most permanent things. They're the ones who have learned to dance with impermanence instead of fighting it. 7. The philosophical stress testing. There's a thought experiment that reveals something profound about human decision-making. Imagine you had to make every choice in your life as if it would be broadcast on television for everyone to see. How would you behave differently? What decisions would you make? What would you stop doing immediately? Most people make decisions others expect. What feels comfortable, what seems easiest in the moment. They're driven by social pressure, immediate gratification, and short-term thinking. They end up living someone else's life instead of their own. But throughout history, there have been people who seem to operate by a completely different set of rules. They made decisions that seemed crazy to everyone around them, but history proved them right. They had access to a decision-making framework that filtered out all the noise and focused on what really mattered. The seventh technique out of 10 is called the philosophical stress testing, and it uses what I call the Socratic decision filter. Before making any major choice, you're going to ask yourself one simple question. What would I do if I knew it would be studied by philosophers 100 years from now? This question does something remarkable to your thinking. It strips away social pressure because social pressure is temporary. It eliminates short-term thinking because care about timeless principles. It forces you to act from your deep instead of external expectations. You know your decision will be examined by the greatest minds in history. You can't hide behind excuses. You can't blame others for your choices. You can't based on fear or convenience. You have to ask yourself, the highest version of yourself would do about a major decision you're facing right now. How would you approach it if you knew it would be studied by philosophers? What would they say about your reasoning? What would they think about your values? What would they conclude about your character? This isn't about being perfect or pleasing ancient philosophers. This is about accessing the wisdom that's already inside you. When you remove all the external noise and focus on what would make you proud to be human, you always know what to do. 8. The discomfort graduation system. There's a fascinating study about Navy SEALs that reveals something profound about human potential. Researchers understand why some people quit during training while others push through. Discovered that the program necessarily stronger or more athletic. They had developed more valuable. To be comfortable, most people spend their entire lives avoiding discomfort. They choose jobs that don't challenge them. They stay in relationships that don't grow them. They live in places that don't inspire them. They're so focused on staying comfortable that they never discover what they're truly capable of. But there's a group of people who approach discomfort completely differently. They don't see it as something to avoid. They see it as something to seek out. They understand that voluntarily embrace discomfort, you expand your capacity to what life throws at you. The 8th technique out of 10 is called the discomfort graduation system, and it uses what I call the incremental suffering protocol. You're going to deliberately seek out small, manageable discomforts every single day. Cold showers, difficult conversations, physical challenges, mental puzzles that stretch your brain. This isn't about being masochistic or punishing yourself. This is about building confidence through controlled exposure. Every small discomfort you voluntarily embrace proves to yourself that you can handle more than you think. It's like doing push-ups for your resilience. Think about the last time you avoided something because it felt uncomfortable. What was the real cost of that avoidance? What opportunities did you miss? What growth did you prevent? Now imagine having the confidence to walk toward discomfort instead of away from it. When you practice voluntary discomfort, something incredible happens to your psychology. You stop seeing challenges as threats and start seeing them as opportunities. You develop what psychologists call self-efficacy, the unshakable belief that you can handle whatever comes your way. The people who thrive in uncertainty aren't the ones who avoid discomfort. They're the ones who have learned to dance with it. They've discovered that the quickest way to expand your comfort zone is to deliberately step outside it every single day. 9. The present anchoring. There's a neurological fact that will change how you think about anxiety forever. Your brain cannot tell the difference between a real threat and an imagined one. When you worry about something that might happen tomorrow, your nervous system responds as if it's happening right now. You create stress about events that don't even exist yet. Most people live in a constant state of anxiety about the future or regret about the past. They're never fully present because they're always mentally somewhere else. They miss their actual life because they're so focused on imaginary scenarios. But here's what's remarkable. Uncertainty only exists in the future. The present moment is always manageable. Right now, you're okay. Right now, you're safe. Right now, you have everything you need to handle whatever is actually happening. The 9th technique out of 10 is called the present moment anchoring, and it uses what I call the 5-4-3-2-1 reality reset. When uncertainty triggers anxiety, you're going to immediately ground yourself in the present moment by naming 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things, and 1 thing you can taste. This technique works because it forces your brain to focus on sensory information from the present moment instead of imaginary scenarios about the future. You literally rewire your nervous system from anxiety to calm presence. Think about the last time you felt overwhelmed by uncertainty. Where was your mind? It was probably spinning through dozens of what-if scenarios. But where was your body? It was right here, in the present moment, completely safe. When you practice present moment anchoring, you develop what the Stoics called the discipline of desire. You learn to want what you have instead of constantly wanting to have. You discover that this moment, right now, is enough. The people who seem most at peace aren't the ones who have eliminated uncertainty from their lives. They're the ones who have learned to find stability in the present moment instead of searching for it in the future. 10. The legacy reverse engineering. There's a moment that comes to every person who has ever lived. It's the moment when they realize that their time is limited, and they start asking themselves the most important question of all. What did I do with the gift of being alive? Some people ask this question when they're 90, ask it when they're 30. The age doesn't matter. What matters is what you do with the answer. Most people live their lives according to other people's expectations. They choose careers their parents approve of, roles that society values. They make decisions based on what seems safe or practical. They never ask themselves what they would regret not doing if they knew they only had 1 year left to live. But there's a group of people who approach life completely differently. They don't wait until they're old to ask themselves what matters. They reverse engineer their entire life from the end. They imagine themselves at 90, looking back, and they design their current choices to honor that future perspective. The 10th and final technique is called the legacy reverse engineering, and it uses what I call the deathbed clarity method. You're going to imagine you're 90 years old, looking back on your life. What would you regret not doing because you were afraid of uncertainty? This isn't about being morbid. This is about gaining access to the wisdom that only comes from perspective. When you imagine yourself at the end of your life, all the things you're currently worried about shrink to their proper size. Social approval becomes irrelevant. Financial security becomes less important than authentic expression. Comfort becomes less valuable than growth. Now you're going to work backward from that vision. What would your 90-year-old self want you to do right now? What risks would they want you to take? Fears would they want you to? What dream to pursue? This Stoic's called a North Star, a constant reference point that remains stable even when everything else changes. When you know what you want your life to stand for, you can make decisions with confidence even in the face of uncertainty. The people who live the most fulfilling lives aren't the ones who avoided all risks. They're the ones who chose their risks consciously, based on their deepest values rather than their surface-level fears. Conclusion: you now have 10 techniques that can transform your relationship with uncertainty from something you fear into something you embrace. The broken vase technique teaches you to prepare for failure so you can act with fearless confidence. The traffic light system helps you focus your energy only on what you can control. The gratitude time machine makes you appreciate what you have while reducing attachment to outcomes. The resistance mapping technique turns every obstacle into information about where you need to grow. The actor's paradox gives you the freedom to experiment without defending your ego. The rental mindset helps you stay present by accepting the temporary nature of everything. The Socratic decision filter ensures your choices align with your deepest values. The incremental suffering protocol builds your confidence through controlled exposure to discomfort. The reality reset anchors you in the present moment, where you actually have power. And the deathbed clarity method gives you a North Star that transcends temporary fears. These aren't just techniques to survive uncertainty. They're tools to thrive because of it. When you stop trying to control the uncontrollable and start building systems that work regardless of what happens, you don't just weather the storm. You become the kind of person who dances in the rain. The Stoics understood something that modern life has forgotten. Uncertainty isn't the enemy of a it's the secret ingredient of life worth living.
What if I told you that the secret isn't forced to think positive thoughts, but actually embracing it? Here's the nobody wants. Positive thinking in a cycle of it. You happy thoughts, manifest your dreams and push through the pain with a smile. But deep down, you know it's not working. You're tired of pretending everything is fine when it's not. You're exhausted from fighting against reality instead of working with it. That's where radical acceptance comes in. Now, this isn't about giving up or being passive. This is discovering a completely different way to handle life's challenges that actually works. Radical acceptance is fully embracing what is without judgment, so you can find energy on things you can't control and start power they can. Today your brain fight without becoming, and most important, use radical to create the light instead of the want. There's something happening in your mind right now that's sabotaging every effort you make to feel better. You realize but it's the reason why your anxiety gets when you try to. It's why it happens it's why your anger try to suppress it. How to share change how you respond. Picture this: you're walking through wood ground, you step into quicksand. Your natural instincts start thrashing around out. Next, struggle, the deeper every movement you make to escape your situation. This is exactly where emotions right. When you feel anxious, what do? You fight it. You tell yourself to stop being anxious. You try to think positive thoughts. You distract yourself. You avoid situations that might trigger it. But just like struggling in quicksand, all of this fighting is making you sink deeper into the very emotion you're trying to escape. Now here's the truth that will set you free. Emotions aren't your enemy, they're actually information, they're messengers. And you know, when you fight the messenger, you never get to hear the message. Instead of fighting what if you could learn to float on top of them, just like you would in quicksand? Scientists have discovered that when someone is caught in quicksand, the key to survival isn't fighting. You lean back, spread your arms wide, and let the dense mixture support you. You work with the quicksand instead of against it. Then, slowly and calmly, you can move towards solid ground. This very same principle applies to when to rise them. You can learn top of them, without trying to change away. It's in fact the first principle accept, but here's where we're confused. Accepting emotions passive, or we think it means getting emotions control. That's not what radical acceptance is. The internal war that's and honestly think about how much mental energy you use every day fighting your emotions. You wake up feeling anxious about work, so an hour of your day trying to convince yourself everything will be fine. You feel sad about a relationship that ended, so you exhaust yourself trying to think about anything else. You feel angry about an injustice, so you bottle it up and pretend it doesn't bother you. All of this fighting is like struggling in quicksand. Now, I'm going to teach you the exact technique that will help you float instead of sink. This is tip number 1 out of 10 life-changing principles you'll learn today. It's called the 3-second rule for emotional acknowledgement. And it's ridiculously simple, but incredibly powerful. Here's how it works. The moment you notice a difficult emotion arising, you stop everything and take 3 seconds to acknowledge it. Not judge it, not try to change it, just acknowledge it. You say to yourself, I notice I'm feeling anxious right now, or I'm aware that sadness is present, that's it. 3 seconds. No analysis, no solutions, no positive thinking, just acknowledgement. This 3-second pause breaks the cycle of emotional quicksand. Instead of immediately fighting the emotion, you create a small space of acceptance. You're essentially saying to the emotion, I see you, I acknowledge you're here, and I'm not going to fight you right now. This simple act of acknowledgement is like leaning back in quicksand instead of thrashing around. The magic happens in what comes next. When you stop fighting your emotions, they lose their power to control you. They become like clouds passing through the sky of your awareness. Some clouds are dark and stormy, others are light and fluffy, but they all pass through if you don't try to fight them or hold on to them. Right now you're making a mistake with your emotions that's keeping you trapped in unnecessary suffering. It's so automatic that you don't even realize. But on this mistake and learn the simple technique I'm about to teach, you'll wonder how you ever lived without it. Have you ever noticed how you talk about your emotions? You say things like, I'm angry, I'm depressed, or I am anxious. These 3 little words are, well, creating a kind of prison in you. When you say, I am angry, you're not just describing an emotion, declaring that entity in that moment. You're becoming the emotion instead of simply experiencing it. This is a bit like a weather reporter saying, I am the storm, instead of, there's a storm in the area. Imagine just for a second turning on the news and hearing, good evening, I'm with a chance of rain. It sounds rather ridiculous, doesn't it? Yet this is exactly your emotions every single day. Reporters have learned something quite profound that you can apply to your life. They don't become the weather. Instead, they observe it, report on it, and predict how long it might last. They maintain a sort of professional distance while still being accurate, and they know that storms pass, sunny days come and go, and honestly, no weather pattern lasts forever. What if you could develop this same relationship with your emotions? What if, instead of becoming your emotions, you could observe them like a weather reporter observes the weather? This shift in perspective is so powerful that it can transform your entire emotional experience in just a few minutes. Think about what happens when you identify with your emotions. When you say, I am angry, you give that anger permission to drive your decisions, influence your actions, and color your entire day. You become the anger. Your thoughts, words, and behaviors all flow from this angry identity. You're not just experiencing anger, you've become anger itself. But when a weather reporter observes a storm, they don't let it control their behavior. They don't start shouting at the camera because there's lightning outside. They don't hide under the desk because it's raining. They maintain their professionalism while accurately describing what they're observing. They create distance between whether they're reporting on. Here's the second principle of radical acceptance, and honestly, it's going to change everything. This is tip number 2 out of 10. I call it the weather report method. And it's based on a simple shift in language that creates profound changes in your emotional experience. Instead of saying I'm angry, you say I'm observing anger in my emotional landscape right now. Instead of I'm depressed, you say I'm experiencing some heavy clouds of sadness moving through. Instead of I'm anxious, you say I'm noticing some stormy weather in my nervous system. This isn't just wordplay. This is a fundamental shift in your relationship with your emotions. You're moving from being the weather to being the observer of the weather. You're creating space between you and your emotional experience. You're reclaiming your identity as the conscious observer rather than the temporary emotional state. Let me show you how this works in real life. Imagine you're stuck in traffic and you're going to be late for an important meeting. The old way would be to say, I'm so angry right now, and let that anger take over your entire being. You'd grip the steering wheel, curse at other drivers, and arrive at your meeting stressed and reactive. The weather report method changes everything. Instead you say, I'm observing some intense frustration moving through my system right now. There's definitely some anger clouds forming. Suddenly the anger, and observing the anger, you still feel it, but it doesn't control you. You can acknowledge it without being consumed by it. This technique works because it activates the part of your brain that observes rather than the part that reacts. When you observe your emotions like weather patterns, you naturally create the space needed for radical acceptance. You're not trying to change the weather, you're simply reporting on what's happening right now. The beautiful thing about weather is that it always changes. Storms pass, sunny days come and go. Even the most intense hurricane eventually moves on. When you start relating to your emotions as weather patterns, you begin to trust that whatever you're feeling right now is temporary. This creates a natural sense of peace and acceptance. Something happened to you recently that, well, shattered your expectations. Maybe it was a relationship that ended, a job you lost, a dream that died, or perhaps a plan that just fell apart. And ever since then, you've been trying to put the pieces back together exactly as they were before. You've been holding on to the broken pieces, cutting your hands on the sharp edges, desperately trying to make everything look the same as it used to look. But what if I told you that trying to rebuild what was broken is actually preventing you from creating something even? What grieving could become the foundation for something extraordinary? There's an ancient Japanese art form called kintsugi, where broken pottery is repaired with gold. Instead of hiding the cracks, the gold highlights them. The broken places become the most beautiful parts of the piece. The pottery isn't trying to pretend it was never broken, it's celebrating the fact that it survived breaking and became something new. Most people approach life's breakdowns the opposite way. When something breaks, they frantically try to glue it back together, hide the cracks, and pretend nothing happened. They exhaust themselves trying to force their old life back into existence. They refuse to accept that some things, once broken, can't be put back exactly as they were. This is where radical acceptance becomes life-changing. Instead of fighting to restore what was, you learn to work with what is. You stop trying to rebuild the old vase and start creating a beautiful mosaic with the pieces you have. This is the third principle of radical acceptance, and it's tip number 3 out of 10. When your relationship ended, you didn't just lose a partner. You gained pieces of yourself that you can now use to build something new. When your career plans fell apart, you didn't just lose a job. You gained insights, skills, and opportunities that weren't visible before. When your health challenges emerged, you didn't just lose your old vitality. You gained compassion, strength, and wisdom that you never knew you possessed. The Broken Vase reframe isn't about positive thinking. It's about accepting that some changes are permanent and learning to create beauty from what remains. It's about stopping the exhausting process of trying to make your current life look like your old life. Now, just think about someone you know who has been through a major life disruption and somehow came out stronger on the other side. They didn't get stronger by pretending the disruption never happened, you know. They got stronger by accepting that their life had been, well, permanently changed, and by learning to build something new with the pieces they had left. So here's how to apply this immediately. Take one area of your life that feels broken right now, just one. Stop asking, how can I fix this? And start asking, what can I create with these pieces? Seriously, stop trying to go back to how things were and start imagining what could be possible now. Maybe your broken marriage taught you about your own strength and independence. Maybe your failed business gave you the experience you needed to start something better. Maybe your health crisis showed you what really matters in life. These aren't consolation prizes, not at all. These are the gold that fills the cracks. The Broken Vase reframe requires you to accept that some chapters of your life are over. You can't go back to who you were before. You can't undo what happened. But you can take the pieces of your experience and create something that's not just different, but actually more beautiful than what came before. This is radical acceptance in action. You're not denying that something broke. You're not pretending it doesn't hurt. You're choosing to work with reality instead of against it. You're choosing to create instead of just trying to repair. You wake up exhausted every morning, and you can't figure out why. You're getting enough sleep, eating relatively well, and you're not physically ill. Yet you feel like you've been running a marathon in your sleep. You drag yourself through each day feeling drained, overwhelmed, and frustrated. What you don't realize is that you're caught in an invisible trap that's stealing your energy every single moment you're awake. Imagine you're a salmon trying to swim upstream. You're putting tremendous effort into moving forward, but you're fighting against the natural flow of the river. Every stroke is a struggle. Every movement requires maximum effort. You're working harder than you're barely making. Meanwhile, all around you, there are other fish flowing effortlessly downstream, moving faster and farther with a fraction of the effort. This is exactly what's happening in your daily life. You're swimming upstream against reality and it's exhausting you. You're fighting against things that have already happened, resisting circumstances that can't be changed and arguing with situations that are beyond your control. You're spending enormous amounts of mental and emotional energy trying to make reality different than it is. Right now, you're probably swimming upstream against your age, wishing you were younger or older. You're fighting against your past, replaying conversations and decisions that can't be changed. You're resisting your current financial situation, your relationship status, your health challenges, or your family dynamics. You're arguing with traffic, frustrated with the weather, and annoyed with other people's behavior. Every time you find yourself thinking, this shouldn't be happening, you, dive headfirst into what I like to call the upstream swimming trap. Each time you utter, "Why me?" or "This isn't fair," you're really fighting against the current of reality itself. And whenever you replay past events in your mind, hoping you can somehow change them just by thinking about them over and over, you're actually swimming upstream against time itself. Here's something most people just don't quite grasp. Swimming upstream doesn't simply waste your energy. It actually stops you from reaching your true destination. While you're busy exhausting yourself fighting against what is, you're missing out on opportunities to work with what is right in front of you. You're so wrapped up in where you think you ought to be that you can't even see where you actually are or where you might be able to go from here. The fourth principle of radical acceptance is, learning to recognize when you're swimming upstream and then choosing to turn around. This is tip number 4 out of 10, and honestly, it's going to save you more energy than you ever thought possible. So, here's how to identify upstream swimming in your own life. Pay attention to thoughts that start with should, shouldn't, why, or if only. These are almost always signs that you're fighting against reality. Notice when you feel physically tense or mentally exhausted for no apparent reason. This tension is often the result of internal resistance to what is. Listen to your language. Are you constantly complaining about things you can't control? Are you replaying past conversations in your head? Are you fighting against your current circumstances instead of working with them? Are you exhausting yourself trying to change other people's opinions? These are all forms of upstream swimming. Here's the life-changing shift. Instead of swimming upstream against reality, you learn to swim downstream with it. This doesn't mean, becoming passive or just giving up on your goals. It means redirecting your energy from fighting what is to working with what is. It means accepting your starting point so you can actually move forward from where you are, not from where you think you should be. When you stop swimming upstream, something magical happens. All the energy you were wasting on resistance becomes available for meaningful action. Instead of fighting against your current financial situation, you can channel that energy into improving it. Instead of arguing with your past mistakes, you can use that mental energy to make better decisions today. Instead of resisting your current relationship status, you can focus on becoming the kind of person who attracts healthy relationships. The energy savings are immediate and dramatic. People who learn to stop swimming upstream report feeling like they've been given a second wind in life. They sleep better, stress less, and accomplish more with less effort. They discover that they have far more energy available for the things that actually matter. This is the paradox of radical acceptance. When you stop fighting against reality, you gain the power to change what can actually be changed. When you stop arguing with what is, you can start creating what could be. When you stop swimming upstream, you can finally reach your destination. The guest house mindset. Your mind is like a house, and right now you're acting like the world's worst host. Imagine having guests arrive at your home, and instead of greeting them at the door, you hide in the basement. Instead of offering them a seat, you try to push them back outside. Instead of acknowledging their presence, you pretend they don't exist. This is exactly how you're treating the difficult experiences in your life, and honestly, it's creating more suffering than the experiences themselves. Every day, uninvited guests show up at the house of your consciousness. Fear knocks on your door, sadness walks into your living room, anger storms through your kitchen, loneliness sits in your bedroom, and instead of being a gracious host, you spend all your energy trying to kick these guests out, lock the doors, and pretend they were never there. But here's what you don't realize. The more you fight these uninvited guests, the longer they stay. The more you try to evict them, the more comfortable they become. The more you resist their presence, the more they take over your entire house. You've turned your mind into a war zone instead of a place of peace. What if there was a completely different way to handle these uninvited guests? What if, instead of fighting them, you could learn to coexist with them? And what if you could maintain your dignity and your peace while they're visiting, knowing that all guests eventually leave? This is the fifth principle of radical acceptance, and honestly, it's going to change how you relate to every difficult experience for the your life. This is tip number 5 out of 10, and it's called the guest house mindset. The guest house mindset starts with a simple recognition, not your experiences. You are the host of your experiences, guests without becoming the guests. Your consciousness can hold emotions without being consumed by them. You can acknowledge visitors without letting them redecorate your entire inner world. Think about how a good host behaves when unexpected guests arrive. They don't panic. They don't hide. They don't pretend no one is at the door. They open the door, acknowledge the guests, and set appropriate boundaries. They might say, "I see you're here. You can sit in the living room, but please don't go upstairs. You can stay for a while, but this isn't a permanent arrangement." This is exactly how you can relate to difficult emotions and experiences. When anxiety arrives, instead of fighting it, you can say, "I notice you're here. Anxiety." You can sit in the corner of my awareness, but you don't get to make decisions for me today. When sadness shows up, you can acknowledge it. "I see you, sadness." You can be present, but you don't get to cancel my plans or isolate me from people I care about. The guest house mindset isn't about letting emotions control you. It's about maintaining your role as the host while allowing temporary experiences to be present. You're not trying to kick the guests out, but you're also not letting them take over your house.